Welcome, everyone. The ICMA Learning Lab is pleased to present this online education program, Building Trust with a Transparent Budget, brought to you by UNA Solutions. For technical assistance, please email learning@icma.org. Today's presentation will last up to 60 minutes and includes question and answer opportunities. So please submit your questions at any time throughout the presentation using the Q&A panel at the bottom of the screen. During Q&A, our presenters will answer as many questions as time allows. It is my pleasure to introduce today's speakers, Natalie Harnett and Andrew Lewin. Natalie has served as the principal budget analyst for the City of San Luis Obispo, California, since 2018. In this role, she coordinates and oversees the development of the city's two-year financial plan and annual budget, and is a core member of the implementation team for the city's new ERP system. Andrew Lewin is a customer success manager at UNA Solutions, where he helps finance leaders get the most out of technology to achieve their goals and solve budgeting challenges using UNA's Questica budgeting software. He's in his fourth year at UNA, where he also facilitates their eTutor Tuesday webinars and hosts the podcast Quest for Better Budgeting. Speakers, welcome to the program.
Thank you very much, Julian. Appreciate it. Hey, Natalie, how are you?
Good. How are you?
Very good. Very good. I'm excited for this. Thank you very much, Julian, for that great introduction. And thank you, everybody, for joining us on the webinar. This is going to be a lot of fun to be able to get to know Natalie and get to know the city that she works for in San Luis Obispo. And I think it's going to be a lot of fun to kind of go through this, looking at transparency. So I'm excited. All right. So if you have any questions, the best thing to do is put it in the chat or the Q&A. We'll be looking after I ask my questions to Natalie. This will be like an interview style, and it's going to be a lot of fun. I love doing these types of interviews. So we're going to just kind of post these questions as we go through, and let's get started. Okay, so Natalie, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and the role that you have at the City of San Luis Obispo?
Yeah, so Julian kind of gave a little background there, but so I do coordinate and oversee the development of the budget. However, it's really a team effort. So we have 10 departments and we have analysts in each of our departments. So it's a pretty collaborative team. Just kind of a side note, my first full budget cycle was actually like the COVID year. So I was kind of thrown into the fire, just kind of.
A lot of fun. That must have been a lot of fun.
Yeah, but it's got a lot of nexus with transparency and kind of building trust with the community. So that was a really good learning experience. The City of San Luis Obispo is a full-service city. We're located on the California Central Coast, almost directly between San Francisco and LA. Population of a little bit under 50,000, and we have a major state university here. So our population grows a lot when the students are here. It's a really special place. We've got a ton of outdoor activities, vibrant downtown, lots of tourism. About 70% of our sales tax revenue comes from people living outside of the city. So we are under, as far as form of government, it's a council, mayor, city manager form of government. So the city council is ultimately the legislative authority and sets the policies for which we operate. We're on a 2-year financial plan. However, we adopt an annual budget. So we do the 2-year financial plan for a number of reasons. We follow a priority-driven budget system, and we adopt major city goals every 2 years. Usually around 4 overarching strategic goals, and then those you'll see in our financial documents. Those goals kind of filter through more granular areas of the budget. The 2-year financial plan really just helps kind of emphasize those long-range planning and effective program management. Oftentimes the goals are not achievable in 1 year. Many times they're not achievable in 2 years. So you'll see that our major city goals have kind of, gone on for multiple financial plans. But it also limits the amount of work that you need to do in between the financial plans. So we adjust our budget on an annual basis, but the majority of the work gets done every 2 years. So that kind of helps with the budget prep.
Absolutely.
And then as far as our approval process and development, development starts at the department level. our biggest operational cost is staffing. So that's where the budget system in particular is absolutely crucial. And that's where we're able to get all of our modifiers applied and the step increases and all of that. And that's the nice thing about Questica is there's a process we can actually sync it with our ERP system, which is Oracle, and we can use all of the up-to-date information as of that time. So we do that on an annual basis. We also make small changes throughout the year. We do annual changes for inflation and contractual obligations, but any big budget changes go through a formal SOBC is what we call them, which is significant operating budget change process. And that goes to council and allows council the opportunity to kind of weigh in on all the requests and determine which requests we can fund and which ones we can't, given the fiscal conditions in our forecasts. Eventually, the budget makes its way up to the department head, the finance director, and then the city manager before going to council. It's a really similar process on the capital side, but it's a little bit more extensive. We have a 5-year capital improvement plan, which we adjust every 2 years. So yeah, that's in a nutshell how our process works.
Very nice. Very nice. Thanks for all that. It's a lot of information right at the beginning, which is wonderful to give a good context of, what the city's like and how the budget is run. So that's always great. Now, something that's always important, especially when we talk about transparency, is the relationship with government, as well as the budget office with the citizens of your city. So, what is the relationship like? Are people participating a lot in that process or in any kind of transparency process? Can you kind of give us a little bit of a breakdown of what happens and what that relationship is like?
Yeah, so we get a lot of participation. I think one of the unique things about our city is that we have a really involved community and people that want to be involved, which is great. It's probably partially due to our process. So we start our community outreach in the fall before actually developing the budget. So the reason behind that is just to get a pulse on what the community's priorities are at that given time. And it gives us plenty of time to develop budget recommendations that are achievable. So we send out multiple surveys throughout the process. We connect with our advisory bodies. We send out letters to local businesses and stakeholders. And then we've got several council meetings that are pretty structured, but we essentially have a meeting in November to kind of set the stage. And then we have a budget foundation meeting. And then I think the coolest part about our outreach is we have an in-person, well, during COVID, it was virtual, but an in-person community forum, which we have hundreds of people come to. And we have booths kind of set up with staff, subject matter experts on the topic, for example, housing and homelessness. And that gives the community an opportunity to participate with staff. And also we have like polling and questionnaires and stuff like that. So throughout the process, there's a lot of opportunity for feedback, and we do get a significant amount of feedback from the community.
That's really interesting. When you you mentioned the booths and the different type of topics, do those change every year based on what's important from the feedback that you've received before that process?
Yeah, I would say they've been really consistent. If you go back probably for the last 8 or 10 years, just our the needs of the community are similar, but they have changed. So for this last one, for example, we had been hit by some significant storms and had some flooding damage. So we had a booth that was all about, recovery from the storm. So it's very tuned to the current time, but the actual booths are based on the results of the community survey, which is sent out several months beforehand.
Okay, wonderful. Great. Thank you. Okay. Can you describe how your organization is focusing on outcomes today through the preparation and delivery of its budget, and then how you're measuring, like how you're looking at the KPIs and how you're measuring success? Before you answer, I just wanted to tell the chat, we'd love to know from the audience as well, is what outcomes is important for your organization, or what your organization is focused on. What outcomes? Just add that in the chat. We'd love to hear from it. So as Natalie answers, I'm going to be monitoring that, and I'm going to read some out after you answer. So just to repeat the question, just to describe how your organization is focusing on outcomes today through the preparation and delivery of its budget.
Yeah, so I think measuring success continues to be the most challenging part for us. It's just coming up with measurable impacts because we know we're doing a lot of work, but how do we actually measure that? So we use our budget to communicate and measure progress on our strategic goals. Within each major city goals, there are a ton of different tasks, and each of the tasks have specific completion dates. And we go to council quarterly with budget updates, and with the budget updates, we provide a status on each of those tasks that was scheduled to be completed. And if it got pushed out, why did it get pushed out? So just kind of really focusing on the transparency of where we're at. With the last couple of financial plans, we've also tried to create linkages between the overarching strategic goals and with the department-specific performance measures. So we measure and report out on those every 6 months. So for example, one of them could be in relation to housing and homelessness, could be how many contacts our social worker made with a homeless individual, or something like that. That was just one I had on the top of my head. But but it is difficult trying to measure that success.
Yeah, I can imagine. Okay, thank you. We haven't had any feedback yet in the chat. So, here we go. Nice. We're getting some. We have employee retention, completed projects, approved future project funding. That was by Chelsea. And another person put in CFW focuses on YOY revenue growth, grants awarded, occupancy rates. That's good. Good to hear. All right. Let's move on just to the next question. We have a poll. So if Julian, if you can put up that poll for us. The question is, have you received feedback from citizens and on how transparent you are? Love to hear yes or no from that. That would be great. We'll give about 30 seconds or so as people start answering, or just as people stop answering. Love to see this. Just a little longer. Here we go. Okay, you haven't received feedback. Okay, that's interesting. A lot of people haven't. Well, it's 60-40. So I wouldn't say the majority, but not an over majority of this. So that's really interesting. I'd love to hear in the chat, for those who've heard back about how transparent you are, what those answers are in terms of what the people have said about how transparent people are, or your government is. So that'd be really nice to know. Okay, I'm just going to close this here. All right. We're going to continue because the next one is, so the next question here for you, Natalie, is how are you optimizing the planning process to better engage and build trust with residents? Talking about transparency and building that relationship.
We're always trying to improve our engagement, and I think each year we get a little bit better. One of the ways that we're optimizing the planning process is just through enhancing our communications through social media and other outlets. So we have a really great internal communications division, and they work in collaboration with our Diversity, Equity, Inclusion Office. So we've been trying to expand our outreach to members of the community that maybe wouldn't normally be involved or know how to get involved. We've made a lot of our materials more accessible through translation into Spanish. We always make sure to have Spanish speaking representatives at our community events. So I think that really helps just increasing the ability for people to be involved if they want to. We also have although we have a set financial planning period, we're continually evaluating and reassessing our budget and the overall strategies. And the more we can bring residents and council along through that process, I think it really helps build the trust. So we use our, kind of like I mentioned before, we do use our quarterly reports as an opportunity to kind of educate residents and council, which enhances trust and just kind of helps ensure that there's no surprises when it comes to budget development. So as soon as we, are aware of a potential challenge or, accomplishments, even on the other side, we make sure to be transparent about that through our quarterly report. So it's just, I think it's the constant communication.
Yeah, for sure. And do you receive feedback when you post those quarterly reports and other materials?
Not always. It depends on what's going on. If we have, for example, we're trying to build a new parking structure or something that someone is really interested in, we often do receive feedback, but it kind of depends.
Yeah, I would imagine so. Okay, awesome. And we have some Michael Johns responded to like what people have talked televise the budget priority setting sessions. So that's always interesting to have that televised. That's pretty cool. And I'm sure with a lot of the technology now, that's probably easy to do, or easier to do than just put it on a television show. You can probably put it on the web as well, I would imagine. Thanks, Michael. I appreciate the answer for that. All right. On to the next question now. So when we're looking at building trust, is there anything that you can share on how you've helped create that culture of transparency and accountability? I mean, we kind of mentioned it a little bit earlier where, we talked about the different technologies that are available to build that, that transparency. Is there anything that you can share on how you've helped, like how the city's helped create that culture of transparency and accountability?
Yeah, I think you can look at it both externally and internally. I really like the comment about the website. The details via the website is great, and we do try and do that. Externally, kind of like I mentioned before, I think it's being able to tell a story to council and the public that they can understand. And we use the system a lot to help us with that. We're able to kind of show our initial budget. These are our old assumptions. These are our new assumptions, and this is how it impacts the bottom line. Or in the case of developing our major city goals, oftentimes there will be a proposal or recommendation made. And we can kind of go back to the drawing board and say, okay, that's a great idea, but in order to make that happen, something's going to need to come off of the table. So just kind of being transparent with council and the community that we can't do everything, but we can do something. So it's what is really the priority, and being clear on the fact that there are trade-offs and not making promises that we can't keep. Internally, I think the most important thing is just having a centralized budget platform, which really helps foster a culture of transparency. Our organization is maybe a little bit unusual in that there are a lot of people involved in the budgeting process, and we spend a lot of time making sure that program managers understand their budgets. So in order to do this, people need to have access to our budgeting system. So we have the unlimited license package with Questica, but that's really helped kind of expand and give people opportunity to add detail to their budgets, or just kind of the transparency. On the flip side of that, the more cooks in the kitchen, it's easier for things to get inadvertently changed or potential mistakes to be made. So we do have specific permissions set up for everyone. And the great thing about Questica too is you can get a record of who's made changes. We don't use that to point fingers, but oftentimes it's really helpful because there's a reason that somebody made a change, and the current analysts may not know or have been aware. So it kind of gives us that paper trail, which I think really helps foster accountability, because people aren't just going in there and making changes with no reason. Yeah,
definitely. Love that. Okay, that was great answer, and thank you, Trent, for putting in that comment about the pertinent details via the website. Is helpful for citizens, especially in this day and age. All right, we'll go to the next question. So when we talk about being transparent, it's always hard to make sure that everybody's getting what they need. There's a multitude of ways of getting at citizens and communicating with citizens, but you can't always get to everybody. So I'm always interested in hearing how residents have responded sort of to the efforts made to promote that transparency for the city.
I think generally residents respond positively to the efforts to promote transparency. There's always, unfortunately, when you're transparent about potential challenges or bad news, that you often get negative responses to that. But I think in the grand scheme of things, it's positive because we are being transparent. We've had really positive feedback both from our city council and from residents and community members about our process and our budget documents and overall financial management. We manage our finances really well. And our last finance director had a background in marketing, and she really did a lot of work to kind of reinvent the way we presented to council and prepared the budget. And what we've learned is that if you make it more accessible, people are interested. But when you just have pages and pages of numbers, unless you're crazy like me, it's pretty overwhelming and people lose interest. So if you make it more accessible and make it more of a story, then people are going to respond more positively. The last couple of years, we've tried playing around with different ways of doing that. Some have been successful and some have not been. But I think it's just important to show that we want the community to understand and we're not trying to hide anything. One example that I was just thinking about was, for example, our police department budget. That's the top of mind thing for the community. And it is, if you look at the budget, it's one of our largest operational costs. But if you peel back the layers in kind of an accessible way, you'll see that over 25% of our police staff are non-sworn. It funds several social workers. We have a community action team. We provide neighborhood services, and we do all these things that people may not have been aware of. So I think it's just really finding a way to show the community what they want and what they need to see. And using the system to be able to slice and dice that information in the way that's helpful.
Yeah.
So we use Questica to flag certain things, or you can create specific fields and then just have the system kind of spit out the information for you. So it's really a matter of how you present it and how you slice it and dice it.
Yeah, and I think using that example for the police force is really really handy, because when you look at the overall number, it might look big, but then you look at the breakdown of how it's diversified throughout a number of different departments within the police department, or sections. I'm not sure what you call it. It makes it a lot easier to digest and to understand where certain resources are going, and maybe in the future how those will be changing and so forth. So I think that's really great. So thank you for that example. Okay, so we'll move on. We have another poll coming up here. And we're going to start getting into a bit of the technology aspect of running a city and the budgeting process. So for the poll today, Julian, if you can pull that up, what role does technology play in your budgeting process? So, we just have three. It's either too much, just enough, or not enough. It'll be interesting to see some of the answers here, because I think it'll look at how tech savvy everybody is, and the people in the different departments and of different cities and counties. So I think that'll be interesting to kind of figure out. So someone who's involved in a lot of technology over my lifetime, I think it's, I never think it's enough, but it'll be interesting to see. So just Julian, just let us know once people stop answering, or 30 seconds or so, and then we'll get into the answer. We should be almost done here. All right. I like how there's less, not too many is saying too much. Quite a bit saying, well, almost over 50% saying not enough, and then others just enough. So that's interesting to see. Obviously, technology has increased a lot in this process. Thank you, Julian, for posting that. Appreciate it. And so now it's a matter of looking at your city, Natalie, and how do you view the role of technology in your budgeting process? You mentioned Questica before. How has that type of technology and other technologies helped you?
Yeah, technology is definitely our friend. I think that there is a way to use it, and I think it can get frustrating. But I think we take it for granted sometimes. So we went through an ERP implementation like 5 years ago, but we're still dealing with some of the aftermath of that. And due to some timing delays, we didn't actually have a budget system for a few years.
Right.
So as frustrating as it can be, a new technology can be, it makes you realize that it's a lot worse not having it. I think the biggest thing for us internally is kind of what I mentioned earlier about the centralized location. When departments are working on multiple documents or working offline, you run into major version control issues, and that can have a huge impact. You know, for example, if I'm working on publishing our final budget document in one version, and if someone updates something small somewhere else, it's not going to get adopted by council. Therefore, it's not going to make it into the budget. So that's super important. I think it's also really important to keep records and have snapshots of what the assumptions were at a certain time in order to tell that story of how things change. So that's the neat part about Questica is it's all kind of based on like what your assumptions were in a specific year. And then when you roll over to the new year, it starts kind of brand new. And then you can go back in time and see, oh, this is what we thought this was going to be and what changed. I think it's also been especially important lately because we've had a lot of retirements and turnover. So we've lost a lot of institutional knowledge. Unfortunately, some of that we'll never get back. But over the last couple of years, I've been making a point to try and have everyone document everything and, you know, attach documents or put things in there that notes that may be obvious for you, but someone 10 years from now might not know why a certain budget line exists or something. So in that sense, it's a really great tool. Also, just for the approval process, we have a kind of formal approval process where it goes through each step, and it goes back to the accountability piece of it because everyone is accountable for signing off on us at a certain time. And we have a record of saying, oh, well, the department head has signed off on this. So yeah, I think that part has really been great. And then kind of on the external side, like I was mentioning earlier, we just have recently started building out our open book site, which is an external facing budget platform through Questica. And we've got some really positive feedback from the community on that using our website. So there's a lot of ways that technology can be helpful. It's just making sure that you're using it in the right way. And some audiences prefer more technological and some less. So we always kind of try and meet in the middle. If we, for example, our budget and brief, we make sure to have paper copies of those available on our front counters and stuff. But as far as for internal processes and the budgeting tools, we could not go without.
Yeah. Well, I can imagine too, you're about 6 or 7 hours away from Silicon Valley. I would imagine there's a bit of people who are like really tech focused and be like, I want more tech, right? Do you guys get a little bit of that from people?
Yeah, we do. And we've been moving, our current council is very supportive of the tech. So yeah.
And also, I mean, one of the, especially you mentioned at the beginning of this, how your role started during COVID. Was the city did they go fully remote at that time? I know a lot of places in California went fully remote. Was that the case for you?
Yeah, we were pretty much fully remote, unless you had to be, out in the field. But yeah, I want to say it was about 6 months. I've completely lost track of time, and we're still kind of hybrid. So some people do still work remote.
Right.
And yeah, we actually had our community forum that year during COVID. So we couldn't have it in person, and it was kind of risky. We weren't sure how it was going to work out, but we actually had a virtual forum. So we had a bunch of like different YouTube channels set up, and people could join basically a booth, but it was like a virtual booth. And it was awesome. In fact, we got a lot of positive feedback that people preferred it that way because they could participate from home. So we're kind of thinking maybe with the next financial plan, we try and do some sort of merged virtual and in-person. Yeah.
I know a lot of conferences in a variety of different sectors are in industries are starting to use that hybrid model, and it seems to be working quite well for people who can't travel or people who can't get to isn't as accessible to get out of the home and get to certain places at certain times. So that's always great. And I'm sure having something like having the technology to be able to collaborate over a cloud service probably worked pretty well too, right? With Questica and being able to work from home and everybody from home or different places.
Yeah, we're all on the cloud. So it's,
Awesome. Great. Okay, we're going to move to the next question here. Oh, yeah. So is there anything that you'd like to add about your organization's use of Questka or Unis Solutions, as we're known now, to support transparent budgeting? You did mention Open Book. What are the plans with, you're mentioning you're starting to implement different aspects of it. Can you maybe elaborate on the Open Book offering and what the plans are?
Yeah, so I have a lot of plans for it, but we just with the last financial plan, we've got a report for expenditures, and we have a report for operating, and then there's the capital piece of it. The capital piece of it is really neat because there's actually a map, and you can click on a specific location and see what the project is and what the cost is and the different funding sources. So we haven't completely built that out, but we do have all of our projects in there. And then on the expenditure and the revenue side, it's great because you can kind of toggle back between years, and you can see a bigger picture if you want to see like a line graph of over time.
Mm-hmm.
And what I've done is I've input from our financial plan, we have all of our narratives associated with different reports. So you can actually add that into, so if you go to it and click on the general fund, it will explain what the general fund is. So it's essentially a way to recreate the financial plan in a more interactive way. So I've just started kind of expanding that and playing around with that. But and then we've got our budget and brief and some other, like our city manager message, and it just a lot more accessible way to see things than opening our 500-page financial plan document.
Well, you can put a story behind it too, and humanize it a little bit, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah,
and there's a lot of flexibility and customization opportunities that it's great. What I love about Questka is I can do a lot of things without getting IT or support involved. Because I like to if I have an idea, I like to just play around and see if I can do it. So that's the really fun part is we have a lot of customization and flexibility opportunities. I'm super excited. Also, we are in the process of upgrading to the new version.
Mm-hmm.
There's some scenario modeling features, which is really neat, and that's going to help with our internal and external transparency. So during COVID, I started doing scenario modeling. In fact, with our financial or our budget during that year, we presented 3 different scenarios to council and kind of said, well, we're going to go with this one in the middle, and these are the assumptions. But on the back end, I have all of these spreadsheets that have all those different scenarios and the long-term forecast and everything. So being able to get that into the system is going to be great. Because we're constantly just trying to plan for the future, and it's impossible.
Yeah. No, that's wonderful. Great. Well, thank you, Natalie. Appreciate all that information, all that feedback. It looks like that's all for the questions that we have for today. Now we can open it up to questions from the audience and see what people have to say. So you can put it in the Q&A box or in the chat. It's a little easier for us to monitor in the Q&A box. So if you want to add your questions in there, I think that would be greatly appreciated. While we do that, Natalie, I do have a question for you while we wait for those questions to come in. You said you started in COVID. Now, things are starting to kind of come out of COVID, and we're starting to see a little bit more of I guess a change. How has that for you, especially starting in COVID with San Luis Obispo? How has that changed for you? That process changed, like in terms of doing in COVID and out of COVID. Are things a little bit, when you do the budget, a little bit more sure than before, or still kind of changing all the time?
I would say they're almost more unsure, but it taught us how to be more flexible. And, as
Gotcha.
Public sector government, it was great because it kind of taught us that we can pivot and we can do these things. So when it comes to our budget, we have to be able to kind of do the same thing and pivot and change. And you can't do that when you're talking about staff and, there's a lot of different factors there. since COVID, I mean, we had the significant storm events in January. So we're still dealing with how we're going to pay for all of that and trying to figure out what's going to get reimbursed by FEMA. So that's a whole thing that's going on right now. So I feel like since COVID, it's kind of been one thing after the other, but I am hoping it kind of settles down a little bit. We have the 2-year financial plan, which has been great, but I think, arguably maybe a 1-year financial plan would have been more helpful over the last 4 years, but just because there's been so many changes, but remaining transparent and keeping that trust with the community that will keep them abreast of whatever is going on, I think is really the important piece. And we've done a really good job of doing that.
Yeah, fantastic. Penny Fratz said she joined a little bit late, so we may have covered this. I don't think we have, though. Do you have a strategic long-range plan? They say she says, they struggle with priority goals changing every 2 years with new council members and a new mayor. So, I guess within that context.
Yeah, that's a really good question. I mean, we have a general plan, and we have a ton of different strategic plans. We've got economic development strategic plan. We just, created a homelessness strategic plan. We've got so many, so it's actually kind of difficult trying to juggle all of those strategic plans and the long range plan. And as far as with the goals and the priorities changing every 2 years, that was a big kind of issue with this last cycle. Is we felt that a lot of things were still important, but it's hard, other things come up, and we had kind of gotten in the habit of just adding more to the plate. So we're really trying to focus on like narrowing the scope of our goals. But it is challenging. I think our title for our major city goal went from climate action, and then it was climate action, sustainable transportation, I'm forgetting the last one, but we just kind of piled everything on and made it, we're like, oh, it's still one goal, but we've got all of this stuff encompassed in it. So I think really just having a clear long-range strategic plan, and it's difficult when you do have new council members that have different points of view or different priorities. So we've been really lucky because they've stayed relatively consistent over the last 5 years, but I expect eventually that will change.
Yeah, for sure. Okay. Trent asked, Natalie, on your capital budgeting, how static is the definition of what constitutes capital? And do you and the other departmental analysts track this, or do you have another centralized tracking mechanism? There's a follow-up to that, but I'll let you answer that, as if that was a mouthful.
Yeah, I'm not sure I'm 100% understanding. How static are the projects? Is that the question? Yeah,
it says what constitute capital? How static is the definition of what constitutes capital? And do you and other departmental analysts track this, or do you have another centralized tracking mechanism? So I guess, do your capital projects change over time, or do they remain static? Anything, it says here, anything of 10K capital, et cetera.
Got it. Yeah. So our definition of capital is a capital expenditure would be anything above $25,000 that is an asset or maintenance of an asset. And what we've been it's supposed to be static, but the problem is the cost of everything has increased. So we have a 5-year plan, and we say we need to get these vehicles replaced within this schedule. We need to build this bridge at this certain time, but you constantly, every year, really, we're having to move that around just because the cost of the project in year 1 has increased. So then you have to bump something down to year 2. We have an internal CIP, capital improvement plan review team, which goes through and works with all of our analysts and the departments to understand what projects are priorities and whatnot. But it's really not static. It's constantly, especially with these storms, it feels like everything's been shuffled around. We recently passed a local sales tax measure, which has helped, but it almost, more funding, more problems sometimes. So we've got a lot to juggle, but I don't know if that totally answered the question.
I think so. Trent did have some follow-ups. Says, how is capital depreciation tracked, and is software utilized specifically for capital and or capital depreciation and or capital projects?
Yeah, so we use our ERP system to track our capital assets and depreciation and all of that. So that happens on an annual basis, kind of with the audit. But yeah.
Okay.
We use Oracle for that.
Okay, perfect. And Trent says, thank you very much. Thank you for the clarification, Trent. And then someone else asked, I assume you have financial policies guiding your budget balances and reserves. Has your organization struggled with maintaining these policy thresholds?
So we recently we've made some enhancements to our policies. We have a capital reserve policy of 20% of our capital budget. I would say the hardest part is not necessarily sticking to, adopting the beginning of the year, having the appropriate reserve amount, but it's in using the reserve, especially on the capital side, just because of the increased cost of projects. We've had to dip into our reserve. We were already dipping into our reserve as of July 1st, and we probably need some clearer policies on what constitutes use of reserves. Is it really like an emergency? So we do have policy language for that. But it's something we struggled with the latest storms. We had assumed that we would be dipping into our reserves, our operating reserves. I'm not sure if we'll need to. I think we ended the year a little bit more positively than we thought. But we do have policies if there is any fund balance above, above the required amount, that immediately goes towards replenishing our reserves. We also have a very strategic fiscal health response plan goals to pay down our CalPERS unfunded liabilities. So we have some really great policy language on, using one-time fund balance in order to make these additional payments to CalPERS. And that's going to help us in the long run. So we have a really great, we have really good fiscal and budgeting policies, and I'm happy to send those too.
Very nice. Thomas Liu mentions that he joined a little late, so this may have been answered, but I don't think it had. But says, my agency is reluctant to have more transparency of the budget for a variety of reasons. Example, difficulty organizing the numbers and message and how much detail to provide, fear that citizens won't like how much is being spent on something, etc. Can you summarize the main reasons for transparency for San Luis Obispo?
Yeah, this is tough, and we always are trying to balance that because you want to be as transparent as possible and you want to show all the detail, but then oftentimes people get caught up on pieces of the detail and may not understand the full picture. But I think for us, transparency, we already have like a pretty good relationship with the community, I think, and are trusted, but in the beginning, I can imagine if you come from an organization where it's a little bit more reluctant, the beginning might be tough, but I think in the long run, that transparency will help. The second part of the question, have you had citizens call outline items that they didn't like, and how do you resolve that? Yeah, we have that all the time in public comment. It's just part of the job process. But you can't make everyone happy, unfortunately, and I think the transparency on how the budget works, I think oftentimes people are just not exactly sure how it works, and understanding the fact that there are trade-offs to everything. So we cannot do everything. So what are really the priorities, and making sure that we're clear on that from the beginning. That way we make as little people upset as we can.
And hence why you said that the feedback starts at the beginning, right? Trying to get people to reply to certain questions and certain priorities that they think are important. So hopefully that will resolve that by the time it gets to, putting out the budget and so forth, right?
Right. And we do check-ins, and we actually produce a draft budget in April. And the purpose of that is to get feedback at that point, like, hey, did we get it right? Or do you want to make changes? And then we have another month and a half in order to make changes for the final budget.
Perfect. Ty Guy asks, is software utilized to capture and track KPIs?
Is software used to track KPIs?
Yeah, is it like what software do you use? Like, do you use software to track and capture KPIs or capture and track KPIs?
We're not using overarching software right now to track KPIs. That's something I'd like to do. Each of our departments, depending on what their KPIs are, tracks them in a certain way. For example, Parks and Rec might be how many applicants they have for a swim class or something. You know, they have that granularity and they have their systems in order to track all that information, but we don't have like a centralized location or a software that we're doing that with. It would be great to kind of implement something like that, but
Yeah.
not
Okay.
yet.
Not yet. That's all right. Okay. Lucy D asks, transparency is one of government pillars. They are using public taxpayers' money to run the government, and every penny must be traced to a valid expense. If the citizens do not like how we spend the money, that is why politicians are elected, I guess. So if they don't like, I guess that was more of a comment in terms of how people, I guess it was more to Thomas's comment or a question about, if people don't like it. So yeah, I guess if they don't like it too much, they will elect somebody different. That's the beauty of democracy in this. It was Lucy says it was a comment. Thank you, Lucy. I appreciate it.
Yeah.
It's a very good comment. Yeah. Yeah. And it definitely makes it's supposed to make politicians think carefully, I guess, is what it is. It doesn't seem like we have any more questions. I do have one more question. It's related to what you mentioned earlier. You said you had a lot of storms, especially in California, and seems like Central California got hit pretty badly with floods and so forth. And a lot of it's due to climate change. I've got a scientist background. We've seen a lot of damage due to climate change. We recently saw it in Maui. We've seen it here in Canada and so forth. And I did read an article that from a FEMA perspective, they've already gone through their budget and they're already, going in. I think they're like $4 billion over their budget already with damages. That was as of July. Is the city taking any, from the budget perspective, is the city taking any steps to try to plan for, getting over damages or, looking at ways to, make sure the damage is minimalized in the next storm or, snowfall or what have you? Is there anything going on with that?
Yeah. So, I mean, I won't speak to all the technicalities of it, but
Right.
We're working, that's like our number one kind of thing that we're working on right now is trying to get a complete list of all of the projects that need to be done and prioritize them based on one of those factors is if we have another wet year, which is what they're expecting, if we don't do this project, what will happen and what are the ripple effects of that? So we're working and also on the budget side of it, trying to figure out what percentages we think might be reimbursed and what projects are reimbursable, which aren't reimbursable. So we've got a whole team working on that. We're actually working with a third-party consultant as well. But yeah, it's a big exercise of just trying. We're using our forecast to kind of make these different scenarios. So, what if this project isn't reimbursed? How will we pay for it? Are there other projects, on the docket that can be moved out to later years? And it's tough, but
it's a tough one. Yeah, no doubt.
That's the fun part of the budget.
Yes, it's to deal with the predictable but yet unpredictable at certain times, depending on when it comes through. We do have another question from Gloria Huang. She says, our municipality stakeholders tend to undervalue the role of central office in the whole budget process and more focus on individual departments, but the central office actually put a lot of efforts in balancing the budget, strategic planning, follow the policy, etc. Her question is, how would you represent your thinking process in the budget documents?
That's a good question. I mean, we struggle with the silos as well. And the internal piece of it is, so the budget office, myself, it's just the office of one, and the finance director, we work to kind of put the forecast together and see what the bottom line is. And then how do you let departments know that information in order so that they can submit their budget requests and whatnot. I think it goes back to transparency and trust. And I think if we're transparent with, our city manager is great about communicating information to the department heads, and just understanding how the needs of the department fit in with the needs of the organization as a whole. So we have a financial plan steering committee, which is comprised of a bunch of different individuals within, not all department heads, but people that kind of have a unique view of the organization, and they're supposed to kind of go through and look at things holistically and give these budget requests kind of that critical eye. But how do we communicate it in the budget document? I think in the city manager message specifically, we try and call out all of the different challenges and our thinking behind the forecast. Everything that we do is focused on long-term sustainability. So kind of trying to think of what, explain what the impacts are of certain decisions and whatnot. But yeah, that's a tough one too. I mean, it's
Yeah, no doubt. I mean, it's something I'm sure that a lot of people, go back and forth on with the departments in the central office. Great. Awesome. Well, Natalie, it looks like that's all the questions we have from the audience for today. I want to thank you. So Gloria says thank you as well. I want to thank you so much for giving us your time and sharing and being transparent yourself on the transparency process. It's always wonderful to be able to talk to one of our customers and be able to get some feedback on how your process goes. And I'm sure for the IMCA audience here, it's really helpful as well. So thank you so much for joining us today. We really do appreciate it. And I guess, Julian, back to you. We want to thank everybody. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Natalie and Andrew. And with that, we must conclude today's webinar. A special thank you to our presenters and to everyone who joined us today, and we hope we will see you again soon. Please take a moment to complete a brief evaluation of today's program by returning to the ICMA Learning Lab page where you logged in today. The survey must be completed to unlock your certificate for this program. After completing the survey, you can access the certificate via the Achievements tab at the top of the interface. Today's program is copyright 2023 by the International City County Management Association with all rights reserved. This concludes today's program. You may now disconnect.